everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Climate Conundrum Podcast. I am your host, Sanika Diwanji, a climate communications expert, and today we have a very distinguished guest with us, Mr. Unnikrishnan Nair. He's the head of climate change at the Commonwealth Secretariat and has an extensive background in climate finance, adaptation, and mitigation. And he has worked with leading organizations like the UN, GIZ India, along with Global Green Growth Institute as well. Today, we're going to tackle, obviously, considering his profile, we're going to tackle an issue of how international cooperation happens surrounding climate change issues, especially in context of the Commonwealth Secretariat. So, Mr. Nair, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
So for our understanding of the listeners, I think let's start with what your role is, what the Secretariat is doing in this field, and some of the key objectives of the program that you're overseeing.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, first of all. So I work in the Commonwealth Secretariat as an Assistant Director for Climate Change and Sustainability. So as the portfolio of climate change in the Secretariat is basically a wider portfolio that covers many aspects of climate action, especially for our small and other vulnerable member countries. So one of the most important challenges that we try to tackle is the issue of access to climate finance and capacities therein. So I head the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, which is basically a facility that support embedding expert advisors in the country for long term in terms of supporting access to climate finance. So the other mandate that we have is the Commonwealth Living Lands Charter, which is basically a charter to work with the 3 Rio Conventions, the Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biodiversity, and the Convention on Desertification, to work on integrated solutions, integrating land, biodiversity, and climate in our member countries, 56 member countries of the Commonwealth. And then we also have a Commonwealth geospatial program where we utilize the satellite application and geospatial information for climate action. So this we are currently implementing in more than 3 countries, basically in the Pacific. And of course, we are in a plan of expansion, looking at the applicability of AI and other technology in this space. Gender and youth responsive climate action is other major stream of work that we are focusing on, which is basically to work collaboratively with member countries in terms of taking gender mainstreaming, especially in the nationally determined contributions, and also in the adaptation planning and other mitigation strategies as well, as it is very important to engage with the youth as well as the gender in the mainstreaming process. And the other important area of work is the NDC planning and implementation and the investment planning in collaboration with the NDC partnership and also with the UN bodies, which is to ensure that how our member countries work on the resubmissions and of course on multiple aspects of NDC programming, and also about how the investment plans and budgeting happens in a very coherent manner with the country's financial system. And the last bit that we work on, not the least, is the climate change and health aspect, which is basically to see that how we can have more low carbon climate resilient health systems in member countries. So that's the kind of a wide range of portfolio that we manage. And we also support the process of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in every 2 years. So this year it's going to be in Samoa. So we will be looking forward to positioning the Commonwealth ideologies and thoughts in terms of how we support member countries in terms of climate resilience, especially in a very dynamic world where stability is much needed for livelihoods as well as poverty reduction and others, and of course to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah.
That is a wide portfolio, and that is a lot of key areas of commitment. For the listeners who didn't understand what NDC is, it's nationally determined contributions. Every nation commits to their own goals and try to work towards them. Mr. Nair, there are 56 countries in the Commonwealth, and that basically is the combined population of around 2.4 billion or so. That's a third of the world population. Um, the issue is that almost all of these countries in the Commonwealth are extremely vulnerable to climate change and are at the forefront of all the issues that we are all facing. So I think I'm going to dive straight into the first question that I have. Because a lot of these countries in the Commonwealth, nearly 45 out of the 56 actually, are small island developing nations or just developing nations in general. What is the Commonwealth's plan of action, and are there any key areas that you're looking at, especially in terms of coastal erosion, safeguarding the communities?
Yeah, definitely. See, as I've explained initially, the Commonwealth heads of government meetings mandate the Secretariat to do certain activities, especially in the climate space. And as I've indicated, the two wide and very prominent mandates that we have got is the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub and also the Commonwealth Living Lands Charter. So these two are broad mandates that support multiple aspects of climate action. And we also do have the Commonwealth Blue Charter, which basically works with our member countries via action groups in terms of supporting climate action, especially in the ocean space. As you know, oceans is one of the major contributor in terms of building a resilient climate or weather condition in different parts of the world, actually. So obviously, so those three are some of our prominent mandates that basically build a lot of action to support member countries at multiple levels. To put it, so we do have actions at policy level. We have actions to build human and institutional capacities. We do have actions to enhance financial instruments and financing mechanisms, and of course, knowledge management and learning. So that's again a very important part of it. And the bottom line of use of data and technology for action. So some of these cutting edge areas is where we act on, but all flowing from the mandates that we get as Secretariat from the heads of government meeting. Yeah.
So you basically arrange meetings and understand what each country has as their mandate, and reverse plan the climate financing as well as the policies that you will support on. Is that how it works?
So basically, the model is that we recruit climate finance advisors, the Commonwealth national and regional climate finance advisors, and embed them in the member country ministries. So it's kind of a co-creation that that the advisors work with the government officials and develop project proposals at scale based on the member country request and demand, and it's completely owned by the member country. So obviously, that is the process how we develop project proposals, and during the implementation, also some of the learnings that we get from the implementation processes is plowed back to the policy board as well as for the capacity building, actually. So it's basically a give and take process where the advisors are placed in country and the projects are developed, and the learnings from the project implementation are plowed back to the policy space, actually. So that's the kind of mode of implementation when it comes to the Climate Finance Access Hub, actually.
Yeah, that does make sense. You have yourself worked extensively in climate financing. And one of the major hurdles that is often talked about in climate change is securing adequate funding, right? So over $40 million has been mobilized in climate finance for member countries from the Commonwealth. So what is the plan of action? How are you going to deploy these, and what is happening on ground?
Sure. So as far as accessing climate finance is concerned, the biggest challenge starts once we have accessed the finance in terms of absorbing that money at the country level, and also to implement those projects and get the desired results, actually. So that's the most challenging part of any project implementation. So to that extent, we look at whether the institutional capacities are there. Do we have sufficient mechanisms in place to have such projects being implemented? For example, if you look at private sector engagement, for example, so many countries are still to reach there in terms of having all the kind of policy instruments and other implementation mechanisms available to implement such projects so that it is beneficial for all parties who are involved in funding, actually. So obviously, the requirement for climate finance is very much needed, or the requirement is very high, and also the gap is quite there. But at the same time, it's equally important to have the capacities developed at the country level to deliver these whatever project that has gotten approved from the funding lines like the Green Climate Fund or the Adaptation Fund. So obviously, we also as the climate change program of the Commonwealth, support member countries in the institutional development process. So we supported, for example, the Ministry of Economy of the government of Fiji in setting up a project, in writing the blueprint of a project development unit, for example. So similarly, the climate finance landscape assessment that was done for Zambia and Belize led to development of climate finance unit in those countries. All supported by our partners, including the NDC partnership and others, actually. So these are some of the examples where how we do an integrated kind of an approach, not only to develop project, but also to have the institutional architecture developed parallelly so that the countries can also access projects at scale. So the other aspect is that we are also now supporting many member countries, including Tonga, Maldives, etc., in terms of developing their national funding lines so that they can draw more resources at scale. So, for example, the Tonga Trust Fund, we work with them in terms of designing their financing strategies, and also like the Maldives Trust Fund. So these are some of the examples where the access to climate finance at scale with more institutional strength at the country level is being followed. And so those are some examples that I would like to share here.
Yeah, that's interesting. So a lot of people come to with this question, especially those who want to understand more about how the field works. What kind of profiles would fit in for such jobs at a national level when you say you recruit institutional capacities and people from the sector itself? Will these be finance people? Is specific training given to different institutional or organizations and people there?
So these are generally experienced climate finance professionals. No, so they're not specifically finance professionals, but having a very strong background in natural resources management or development, with experience in accessing, in writing project proposals, developing projects, doing capacity building efforts, and of course knowledge management and other financing strategies. So obviously, if we need very specific expertise around issues like, for example, green bonds or debt swap, we bring in specific technical expertise. But the advisors that we recruit at country level are generally people having background in natural resources, people having background in financing for resource efficiency, so that it's basically, it fits very well into the job requirement, which is to look at the project development modalities from the concept node, the project idea nodes, to concept node, to the detailed concept node. Of course, we do provide a lot of training for the advisors. The Commonwealth, based on the last 9 years of experience, we have developed a Commonwealth Climate Finance Essentials training program, which is basically an online training program, which is an open source, which anybody can utilize, which is again, the new advisors who are recruited, they undergo that training process. Plus, we also get specialized training from other international institutions of repute, including the Frankfurt School for UNEP Center for Finance, and many other training facilities. So it's basically people with experience coming on board and learning from the experience of climate finance access, at the same time getting exposed to new and innovative financing strategies from international institutions of repute.
Oh, yeah, that's wonderful. Also, great to know that there are these resources, open source resources available, because there's a lot of people who want to work in the field, but the training and developing your own skill set is becoming an issue. So yeah, people first, and planet will also follow the same. In terms, you mentioned a couple of these international organizations who fund and support as well. So policy and international cooperation sort of go hand in hand, especially in a position as yours. So what do these two factors, how do they play into the Commonwealth's climate strategy? Do you actively bring in other funders? Do you actively also cooperate with other international or intergovernmental organizations?
Yeah, we do, because so this is basically a very dynamic and a multi-stakeholder landscape, actually. So obviously, we need to collaborate here because as an individual organization, we'll not be able to meet all the requirements. So partnerships is essential. So we have a lot of MOUs that we have signed with partners, including NDC partnership. We work with the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. We work with the Commonwealth member countries who fund us, so with whom we have engaged in terms of specific areas of support. So obviously, yes, we do partner with many international organizations, intergovernmental organizations, member countries, and also we engage with civil society and think tanks as well in terms of bringing the right research and evidence for us, for our advisors, and of course then their supported member countries to develop enabling policies, actually. So of course,
Right.
that's a much needed thing in this particular time, actually.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, bringing in more cooperation opens up channels of other areas to work on as well, because SDGs sort of play parallelly in sync with all of these climate areas. Um, One of the key things that is always talked about with climate change is the mitigation and adaptation process. Could you explain a little bit on what you're working on those lines? I earlier noted that you're using a lot of different mechanisms. You're using AI and geospatial mapping, as well as focusing on particular technologies. So how do these play into your work profile?
I can give you a couple of examples, because especially the use of geospatial data for climate action is something which we have successfully been implementing since 2019 with 3 Pacific countries of Fiji, Vanuatu, and Solomon Islands, actually. So what we do there is to utilize the geospatial information and data basically to write the project proposals in a much more realistic manner, so that there are very less queries coming back from the funding lines, so that the turnover time is reduced. But of course, since it was first time, we took a reasonable time basically to develop project proposals. So we also already started seeing some results, like we've recently accessed from the Adaptation Fund with the support of the Commonwealth Climate Finance Advisor in Fiji, a $5.7 million project for the coastal management, and especially for the sea level rise. How do we build nature-based sea walls with very clear engineering designs linked to it, actually? So similarly, like we are doing a lot of projects where we are also utilizing gender mainstreaming, for example. So we did analyze all the NDCs submitted by the 56 Commonwealth member countries, and so where lies the kind of good practices within the membership that we could probably document. And so we came up with a gender best practice guidance, which was given to many of our member countries to when they were rewriting and resubmitting the NDCs in line with the February 2025 target. So I think those are some of the examples where we have used technology and we have used the analytical knowledge within the Commonwealth to benefit the small and vulnerable member countries to act on policies at country level, actually.
Right. Gender becomes a very crucial part of all climate action. And I see that you're doing a lot of work on that front as well. What are the things that give you hope on this front? Because a lot of times these actions end up being on a very surface level, but grassroots action combined with sort of global systematic approach would be crucial.
Yeah. See, yeah, I agree. Like sometimes that's a concern that many of us have raised, actually, because so since we're working on the kind of core implementation aspects of climate adaptation and mitigation, I think one of the most important element that we are focusing on is how do we tailor the financial instruments to meet the gender responsive action needs, actually. So for example, many of our the micro businesses and small and medium sized enterprises that are operating in our space like have potential for gender based action, especially because since women are custodians, so for most of our natural resources and biodiversity resources, it's essential that they are part of these business models. But of course, in many countries, the land belongs to the male populations, obviously leading to less of collaterals, leading to always dependence on small grants and doing small businesses. And so to move into much more resilient activities at scale. So right now, there is a lot of impetus being given to innovative financial instruments, which is fit for purpose for gender mainstreaming or gender responsive action. So we ourselves did a very good work with the government of Antigua and Barbuda in terms of looking at the possibility of using microequity as an instrument within the Sustainable Island Resource Framework Fund of the government of Antigua and Barbuda. So these are some very promising initiatives that some of the small countries are bringing forth. So of course, that gives a lot of confidence in terms of how we can position gender mainstreaming in a more realistic path rather than just the rhetoric of, yes, there's a necessity, but of course, whether the financial systems or the banking system are well tuned to cater to those needs, actually. So that question still remains in many countries, but we already are seeing good results when it comes to gender responsive financial instruments.
Yeah, gender response, like climate and gender and finance, I think is a triangle that is imperative to solve. It's become a crux of a lot of climate action impediments. A lot of challenges come up there itself. Um, Moving forward, I think in terms of food security, right? When we talk about the Commonwealth countries, like we discussed earlier, a lot of them are developing countries or just vulnerable populations in general. The IPCC also warns that crop yields could be devastated. There'll be about 70% of, no, I'm sorry, about 30% of food security concerns by 2050. Is there something direct as a policy measure that you are focusing on?
Yeah, so under the Living Lands Charter, so we one of our major focus is on sustainable agriculture and food security, actually. So as we all know that this is one of the major challenge that that the agriculture sector is facing in terms of sustainability of production systems and also the consumption system and the other environmental aspects around it, actually. So, and in many countries, we are seeing there's an issue of commercial agriculture and its viability vis-a-vis natural disasters. So obviously leading to a situation of heavy dependence on food imports and then, of course, linked poverty and other issues. So that's an important concern. So, for example, we are working with the UN Convention on Climate Change, especially under their climate resilient food systems, to alliance, basically to work with member countries to do food systems diagnostic studies so that we bring out what are the kind of problems, what are the kind of climate challenges, and what are the kind of maladaptations, so that we can plan the food system strategies accordingly. So it's very crucial because it has a lot of linkages to sustainable action and also human health, and of course on the side of peace and security. So I think it's an important aspect that we are focusing on under the Living Lands Charter in one of the thematic areas. And I think we've just started the implementation of the process, and I think more results will be seen in the years to come.
Right. Are there any case or examples that come to your mind on this front? Any positive ones?
So right now for the food systems diagnostic, we are just starting off the process with the Climate Resilient Food System Alliance, actually. So as soon as we have some results to share, we'll definitely be able to do that, actually.
Of course. So another question is how, I think I'm obviously condensing this question into a very simplistic answer as well, but what would you say are the top things that nations can do to sort of prepare for the coming future? What are the key areas would you outline?
Yeah, no, I think the most important aspect when it comes to man-made climate, especially the man-made reasons for climate change, is basically the emissions. So obviously, it has a strong link to behavioral change, and of course, the way we think about limiting the kind of emissions from urban living, and also in terms of how we design our businesses in a way that it reduces the impact. That'll be like one of the most important aspects. The second most important aspect is that it's inevitable that climate will change based on whatever emissions has gone into. So this adapting is going to be supremely important. So to integrate climate change actions into the development programs of the country governments is going to be very, very crucial. So everything that we do, from urban planning to agriculture to waste management to recycling, so everything has to have a climate angle, so that we're making the entire landscape more resilient, so that the climate extremes will not be able to put what do you call lives at risk, and also livelihoods at risk for people. And the third most important element is finance. I think sufficient finance is definitely needed for these actions to take shape. And of course, everything then need to have a business sense to operate in spaces where the investments are coming even from the private sector. So obviously, the financing instruments and the financial models that the country decide need to integrate all stakeholders, and not to be just centrally driven, so that the acceptability is very poor at the lowest level. So it need to be a multi-stakeholder process actually. So these three for me are the kind of most important aspects, but then there are also equally yet important aspects that we can talk about actually.
Of course, everything is interlinked in the end, but makes sense that you tackle the adaptation process first, involve key local players, and things can move ahead. Climate migration is already becoming an issue and is going to just get worse as we get into the future. What is there some action being taken? Are strategies being developed to sort of curtail this?
See, I think this is basically, again, a larger issue of adaptation, because, again, if you look at the rural-urban migration, it is again bound to happen, because people have an aspirational ladder. And definitely from the historic times, there used to be urban to rural to urban migration. For better livelihood. But now, if you look at the past 20 years, the rate of migration has increased due to different reasons, especially the curtailment of natural resources because of climate variability.
Exactly.
So obviously, thousands and thousands of farmers leaving farming and going to urban areas as daily wage laborers is increased. So that is putting a lot of stress on the urban amenities. And of course, we have now this huge peri-urban space which is evolving. So obviously, the governance mechanism in those spaces are all something which is not well thought out completely in many countries, because we have rural what you call governance systems, and we have urban governance systems. But in the peri-urban space, which is a long term of transition, we don't have much governance mechanism there. I think those are the spaces where we need to have very clear climate resilient strategies moving forward. But so of course, it's again integrating climate change into these urban management should ideally consider these influx of migrants, especially driven by climate change. So what we are doing right now is basically, under the Living Lands Charter, we do have strategies to see if some of the value chains could offer livelihood support, basically for members, especially when it comes to agriculture sector actually. So that's but those are like areas in development actually. So we'll have more to speak about in the days to come. But of course, it's a very important area of work actually.
Right. Yes, thank you. Are there any outcomes that are going to be impact driven? I mean, of course, everything in this sector is towards impact, and that's a heavy word. But looking ahead, what are the key priorities and expected outcomes that you are personally sort of looking forward to?
No, I think now the plans. See, Paris Agreement was a big opportunity for countries to bring these climate considerations into one space. And looking at the Paris rule book, Now that the countries have the plans and the process of planning almost certain and ready, and it's time that these plans are converted into investment plans and investment plans into project proposals and projects at scale. And then, of course, the kind of paraphernalia linked to institutional capacities, the human capacities, and of course, technology, data, and everything coming together for countries. So once we have the investment plans ready, the money being channelized, I think that's a great opportunity for countries to start looking at tackling this issue with finances coming on board, actually. So that for me will be one of the most important area, like so the budget tagging, the climate public expenditure and institutional review. So these kind of mechanisms are going to be substantially important for countries to speak tangibly. And then, of course, the traceability, like we have the enhanced transparency framework where we look at how much of the money that has gone into countries and also the money that has come from the funding sources did achieve realistic results, actually. Yeah.
Right. Yes, last year's COP as well had a big discussion on this front. And Mia Motley was the vanguard of all of these discussions and narratives as well. Um, I think we've discussed enough on the international front, right? But I'd like to know from you, because a lot of young listeners have asked if I could do a segment on this, who are aspiring to work in climate science and policy. What has your journey been like? Is there some advice that you could give to people wanting to work in this sector?
I think the first message that I will give, based on my experience, is definitely the climate science and of course the climate theories are definitely there in paper, which is time tested, and there's a lot of knowledge available. So you could definitely read and understand a lot of things. But it's very important to work at the grassroots level to understand who this whole problem is impacting. And of course, who are the stakeholders in that space? And of course, how those stakeholders see each other's role vis-a-vis their own areas of interest. I think that should be the starting point of young people who would like to work in the climate space. So I work with NGOs in the Himalayas. I work with NGOs in the Northeast, especially helping me in crafting that kind of a thought process, that how natural resources management and governance and businesses, how it conflicts, and also how it can sit together comfortably, and how difficult it is for these three to sit together comfortably. Because unless you have that understanding, then it will be very difficult to appreciate the kind of processes that the government followed to meet these challenges. That is why I always used to tell that the advocacy strategies, then ideally coming from the young people, will be more meaningful once they see the kind of ground reality and know these how these theories and the practical aspects will fit together, actually. So grassroots level experience and of course, like, there are now a lot of opportunities to work with many international as well as national civil society organizations, and governmental bodies are also open for many internships. So I think those opportunities should be utilized to know exactly from where these problems are emanating, and to see like how the solutions are crafted, and what are the gaps, and of course like how we can grow up in this field as more solution providers, rather than being part of the kind of big confusion of as to what we should do and what we should not do, actually.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Anna. This was really helpful. And I hope more listeners get inspired by just understanding the basics. So that's what I try to do with the podcast. If people understand the basics of what climate change is, all the various areas in which expertise and impact sort of cohabit, then hopefully action can also grow on that front.
Sure.
Thank you so much. And
thank you very much.
thank you for watching. And that's all for today's episode of the Climate Conundrum Podcast. I hope that you got a deeper understanding of how the Commonwealth Secretariat and overall how intergovernmental organizations operate in their fight towards climate change, against climate change, and work on climate action. Stay tuned for more insightful conversations, and please do like, share, and subscribe to the podcast if you find it useful.